They thought they'd conquered a kingdom until the city fought back. For months, Hernán Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors had believed Tenochtitlan, the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, was theirs for the taking. This sprawling metropolis, a jewel born from water and ambition, gleamed under the sun, its towering temples piercing the sky, its bustling markets overflowing with vibrant goods, and its causeways stretching like veins across the shimmering lake. Here, millions thrived under the watchful eyes of their gods and their revered emperor, Montezuma II, a civilization of unparalleled grandeur, built on strength, spirituality, and a deep connection to the land. But by the spring of the year 1520, a profound, disquieting tremor began to ripple through the city's foundations. It wasn't an earthquake nor a flood, but something far more insidious: the whispers of war. Months earlier, these strange, pale-skinned men had landed on their shores. They were few in number, yet their intentions were shrouded in mystery, their motives veiled by an insatiable hunger for gold. Montezuma, a ruler steeped in tradition and burdened by prophecy, had initially welcomed these newcomers, believing them perhaps to be divine envoys. He had extended his hospitality, showered them with gifts, and even allowed them to reside within the very heart of Tenochtitlan. But trust, once given, can be easily shattered. The Spanish, with their shimmering armor, their thunderous cannons, and their unyielding determination, had quickly overstayed their welcome. They had seized Montezuma himself, holding him captive within his own palace, a gilded cage that humiliated a sovereign and infuriated his people. The city, once a beacon of order and prosperity, was now a powder keg, its air thick with suppressed rage and a sense of profound injustice. Every day, the tension escalated. The proud Mexica warriors, renowned for their ferocity and discipline, chafed under the Spanish presence. Their sacred rituals were mocked, their gods disrespected, and their emperor held in chains. This wasn't just a political struggle. It was a clash of worlds, a collision of beliefs, a spiritual affront that festered in the collective soul of a nation. The Spanish, isolated and increasingly desperate, felt the city's gaze upon them, a silent, seething animosity that promised an explosion. Cortés, ever the pragmatist, understood the precariousness of their position. He knew that their survival depended on maintaining a fragile illusion of control, a charade that was crumbling with each passing day. The long nights in Tenochtitlan were now filled with an uneasy quiet, punctuated only by the distant drumbeats of Mexica rituals and the hushed conversations of Spanish soldiers. Both sides knew, with a chilling certainty, that the calm before this storm would not last much longer. The stage was set, the players in place, and the curtain was about to rise on one of the most chaotic and bloody chapters in the annals of conquest. The whispers of war were about to become a deafening roar. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, a sacred festival was about to become a bloodbath. The spring sun of the year 1520 warmed the vast ceremonial plaza, a space usually reserved for devotion and celebration. The air vibrated with anticipation for the Toxcatl festival, a vibrant homage to Huitzilopochtli, the Mexica god of war and sacrifice. This was a time of profound spiritual significance, a moment when the entire city, from the humblest farmer to the most decorated warrior, united in reverence. Thousands gathered, adorned in their finest, their spirits uplifted by song, dance, and prayer. The rhythmic beat of drums echoed across the plaza, a hypnotic pulse that spoke of ancient traditions and an unbroken connection to their deities. However, amidst this profound expression of faith, a chilling tension permeated the air. For weeks, the Spanish, under the command of Pedro de Alvarado, Cortés's trusted but ruthless lieutenant, had been left in charge of the city while Cortés himself was away, dealing with a rival Spanish expedition. Alvarado, paranoid and perhaps blinded by greed, viewed the vibrant festival not as a spiritual observance, but as a potential uprising. He saw the gathered warriors, the fervent dances, and the martial undertones of the rituals as a direct threat to his precarious control. His fear, compounded by a profound misunderstanding of Mexican culture, escalated into a horrific miscalculation. As the ceremonies reached their emotional peak, when the Mexican warriors were unarmed, their minds focused on spiritual devotion, Alvarado gave the order. What followed was a massacre of unspeakable brutality. The Spanish soldiers, with their steel swords and lances, descended upon the unarmed celebrants like a sudden, savage storm. The joyous sounds of music and chanting were abruptly replaced by screams of terror and the horrifying clang of metal against flesh. The plaza, moments before a tableau of vibrant life, became a scene of chaotic slaughter. The Mexican warriors, caught completely unawares, could offer little resistance. They fell by the hundreds, their ceremonial attire stained with their own blood, their cries echoing the profound betrayal they felt. The sacred ground of the great temple was desecrated, transformed into a charnel house. It wasn't just a physical assault, it was a devastating spiritual blow, an act of sacrilege that ripped through the very soul of their people. This was not war, it was an execution. The aftermath was immediate and catastrophic for the Spanish. The initial shock quickly morphed into an unquenchable fury. The news of the massacre spread like wildfire through the streets of Tenochtitlan and beyond, reaching every corner of the empire. What little respect or fear the Mexica might have held for the Spanish vanished, replaced by an incandescent rage. This brutal act shattered any illusion of peaceful coexistence. The people, who had endured the humiliation of their emperor's captivity, now saw their holiest rituals defiled and their kin slaughtered. The Toxcatl massacre was the spark that ignited the powder keg. It transformed simmering resentment into open rebellion. The Mexica people, united by grief and a burning desire for vengeance, rose up. The Spanish found themselves trapped, besieged within their own barracks, surrounded by an enraged populace demanding justice. The whispers of war had ceased. Now, only the roar of a wounded and furious city could be heard, a sound that promised a reckoning far more terrible than any Cortés could have imagined. The seeds of rebellion had been sown in blood, and their harvest would be bitter. While Tenochtitlan boiled with vengeance, its architect of chaos, Hernán Cortés, was marching back into the storm. He had left the city months earlier, convinced he had secured his hold, leaving Pedro de Alvarado in command. His urgent mission: to confront Panfilo de Narvaez, a rival Spanish conquistador sent by the governor of Cuba to arrest him. Cortés, with his characteristic audacity, had not only defeated Narvaez's forces, but had also convinced many of them to join his own ranks, bolstering his numbers significantly. He was returning to Tenochtitlan feeling triumphant, stronger, and more secure than ever. But the triumph was short-lived, replaced by a chilling premonition as he neared the capital. The usual throngs of welcoming citizens were absent. An eerie silence hung over the causeways, a stark contrast to the vibrant, bustling city he had departed. This wasn't the Tenochtitlan he remembered. This was a city holding its breath, a city on the precipice of an explosion. As his forces finally entered the great causeway leading into the heart of the city, the true horror of Alvarado's actions became terrifyingly clear. He found the Spanish garrison, once confident and imposing, now besieged within their palace compound, surrounded by a furious and unyielding Mexican populace. The air thrummed with a palpable rage. This wasn't just a rebellion. It was a revolution fueled by betrayal and an unbearable thirst for retribution after the Toxcatl massacre. Cortés, the master strategist, the man who had navigated impossible odds, was now confronted with a situation spiraling wildly out of his control. He had returned not to a conquered city, but to a vast, hostile prison. His immediate priority was to relieve the trapped garrison, which he managed with great difficulty, fighting his way through furious Mexica warriors who swarmed every street and rooftop. Once inside the palace, the full extent of the disaster unfolded before him. The Spanish were low on food, water, and morale, their once grand quarters now a grim fortress under constant assault. Attempts at negotiation, usually Cortés's strong suit, proved futile. The Mexica leaders refused to parley, their trust utterly shattered. Their relentless attacks, day and night, were a testament to their unwavering determination to expel the invaders. Projectiles rained down on the palace walls, stones, arrows, and spears, launched with a precision born of desperation and fury. The Spanish cannons roared in response, cutting swathes through the attacking ranks, but for every warrior that fell, another seemed to rise, their cries echoing the unified will of a betrayed people. Cortés tried to use Montezuma to quell the uprising, ordering the captive emperor to address his people from the palace rooftop. But Montezuma, once revered, was now seen as a puppet, his authority irrevocably broken. His pleas for peace were met not with obedience, but with a shower of stones and insults from his own disillusioned subjects. It was a tragic, humiliating moment that underscored the depth of the Mexica's resolve and the utter failure of the Spanish strategy. The walls of the palace seemed to shrink with each passing hour, closing in on the trapped conquistadors. Cortés, the shrewd and ruthless conqueror, found himself in an impossible position. He had led his men into the very maw of the empire, and now that empire was closing its jaws. The whispers of war had become a cacophony, and for Cortés, the once triumphant leader, the sound was that of a trap slamming shut. He was a conqueror, yes, but for now he was also very much a prisoner, with very few options left. Amidst the rising storm, a tragic figure stood at the precipice of his empire's collapse, Emperor Montezuma II. For months, he had been a prisoner in his own palace, a revered sovereign reduced to a pawn in a brutal game of conquest. His initial welcome of the Spanish, born perhaps from a complex mix of prophecy, political calculation, and a desire to avert conflict, had backfired spectacularly. Now, surrounded by his captors and reviled by his own people, Montezuma found himself caught in an agonizing vice. The Toxcatl massacre had irrevocably shattered any remaining semblance of his authority. The Mexica, once fiercely loyal, now viewed their emperor with a heartbreaking mix of pity and contempt. He had allowed the foreigners into their sacred city, permitted the desecration of their temples, and failed to protect his people from unspeakable atrocities. From the ramparts of the palace, where Cortés forced him to speak, Montezuma faced not the adulation of his subjects, but a hail of stones, insults, and the bitter accusations of betrayal. It was a humiliating, agonizing scene, a public repudiation that broke the spirit of a man who had once commanded absolute loyalty. His final days were steeped in despair. The once mighty emperor, accustomed to immense power and divine reverence, withered under the immense psychological pressure. The palace, which had been his sanctuary, became his tomb. Accounts of his death vary, shrouded in the chaos and conflicting narratives of the time. The Spanish claimed he was killed by his own people, struck by a stone thrown by a furious Mexica. This narrative painted him as a martyr, a victim of his ungrateful subjects, conveniently absolving the conquistadors of direct responsibility. However, many Mexica accounts, and indeed the sheer desperation of Montezuma's situation, suggest a far more somber end. Some believed he was murdered by the Spanish, a burden and an embarrassment once his usefulness as a puppet had completely evaporated. Why keep a king who could no longer control his enraged populace? Regardless of the precise method, the undeniable truth was that Montezuma died within the Spanish compound, a prisoner in the very heart of his shattered empire. His death was more than the demise of a ruler. It was a devastating blow to the already fractured Mexican morale, yet it also fueled their righteous indignation. For the Spanish, it eliminated their most powerful bargaining chip. Montezuma, for all his perceived flaws in dealing with the invaders, had been a symbol, a thread connecting them, however tenuously, to the city's leadership. With his passing, that thread was severed, replaced by an unyielding, unified resolve among the Mexica to drive the invaders out by any means necessary. The death of Montezuma II marked a critical turning point. It extinguished the last flickering hope of a peaceful resolution, however unlikely that had become. The path forward was now clear, grim and soaked in blood. The Mexica would fight for their city, their gods, and their freedom with a ferocity born of grief and vengeance. For Cortés and his beleaguered forces, the passing of Montezuma meant only one thing: the time for talk was over. The time for desperate escape had arrived. The city would soon unleash its full, unbridled fury. The suffocating darkness of a moonless night, June 30th, 1520, shrouded Tenochtitlan. Inside the besieged Spanish palace, a desperate plan was set in motion. Hernán Cortés, facing starvation, relentless attacks, and the grim reality of Montezuma's death, knew there was only one choice left: escape. But escaping a city built on water, connected by narrow causeways, swarming with millions of enraged warriors, was not merely a challenge. It was a gamble for survival. The objective was simple: reach the safety of the mainland. The execution, however, promised to be a nightmare. The Spanish had constructed a portable bridge to span the gaps in the causeways, chasms where sections of land had been intentionally removed by the Mexica to trap them. Gold, plunder beyond measure, was loaded onto horses and carried by soldiers, a burden that would soon prove fatal for many. The heavily wounded were strapped to the backs of horses, a grim procession preparing for what would surely be a bloody exodus. Just after midnight, under the cover of a rare torrential downpour, the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies began their silent, agonizing retreat. The rain, they hoped, would muffle their movements and keep the Mexica warriors in their homes. For a fleeting moment, as the first Spanish units crept along the western causeway, known as the Tlacopan Causeway, it seemed their prayers might be answered. The city was still, save for the drumming of rain on stone. But the Mexica were not asleep. A sharp, piercing cry, perhaps from a lone sentry or a woman drawing water, shattered the fragile silence. "Out! They are coming out!" the shouts echoed across the darkened lake. Instantly, the city awoke. The beat of war drums, once distant, now thundered, growing louder, more urgent, more terrifying with every passing second. The sound reverberated through the very bones of the fleeing soldiers, a primal warning that their escape had been discovered. From every direction, the Mexica warriors materialized, seemingly rising from the very waters of the lake. They swarmed the causeway by the thousands, their canoes, known as canoas, cutting through the water, flanking the Spanish column. Arrows rained down. Spears flew. Stones, hurled with incredible force, battered the tightly packed ranks. The portable bridge, their only hope for crossing the gaps, became a point of horrific bottleneck. It became stuck, jammed by the weight of men and horses, turning the escape into a desperate, chaotic crush. Panic erupted. Soldiers, weighed down by armor and ill-gotten gold, fell into the murky waters of the lake, dragging others with them. The cries of drowning men mingled with the war cries of the Mexica and the desperate shouts of the Spanish officers. The lake became a graveyard, swallowing countless lives, their bodies forming macabre bridges over which others scrambled. Horses, precious and few, stumbled and fell, their riders often doomed beneath them. The battle became a desperate melee in the darkness, a struggle for every inch of ground. The Mexica, fueled by their burning desire for revenge, fought with an unyielding ferocity. They attacked from all sides, using their obsidian-edged swords and clubs to devastating effect. The Spanish, though armed with superior steel, were outnumbered, disoriented by the darkness, and hampered by the treacherous terrain. Cortés, ever at the forefront, fought with a desperate valor, trying to rally his shattered forces. But the orderly retreat had devolved into a rout, a desperate scramble for survival where every man fought for himself. The causeway was choked with bodies, both Spanish and Tlaxcalan, a testament to the night's horrific toll. This was not a strategic withdrawal. It was an agonizing flight from a city that had decided, with terrifying unity, to reclaim its dignity and blood. This was the night of sorrows, a night that would forever haunt the memories of those who survived it. The night was far from over. For the surviving Spanish and their allies, escaping the causeway was merely the beginning of a terrifying race against a furious enemy. As dawn approached on that horrific night, the first light revealed a gruesome scene. The Tlacopan causeway was choked with the dead and dying. But the Mexica's fury knew no bounds. They pursued the retreating column with an unyielding ferocity, their attacks continuing relentlessly from both land and water. The Spanish, battered and broken, were now struggling through the swampy, uneven terrain surrounding the lake. Every step was an agony. Their heavy armor, which had offered protection, now became a suffocating burden in the wet, muddy conditions. Wounded soldiers slowed the pace, their cries adding to the cacophony of the nightmare. The pursuit was relentless, a testament to the Mexica's strategic brilliance and their profound emotional drive for vengeance. From the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco, hundreds, perhaps thousands of canoes swarmed. These light, agile vessels, expertly piloted by Mexica warriors, darted around the struggling Spanish column, launching volleys of arrows and spears. The Spanish, accustomed to fighting on solid ground, found themselves vulnerable, their heavy weaponry ill-suited for naval skirmishes. The brigantines, the small sailing ships Cortés had painstakingly built, were still in the hands of some of his men, but they were few and could offer little widespread defense against the sheer numbers of Mexica canoes. The lake itself became an extension of the battlefield. The water, churned by frantic paddles and the desperate flailing of drowning men, reflected the horror of the scene. Those who fell from the causeway or were dragged from the shore by Mexica warriors often met a swift and brutal end. The Mexica showed no mercy, their resolve hardened by the atrocities committed against their people. Cortés, despite his own injuries and the immense pressure, desperately tried to maintain some semblance of order. He rallied his most trusted captains, urging them to protect the flanks and rear of the column. Every small village or cluster of buildings they passed became a potential ambush point. The Spanish were constantly forced to fight for every single step, their dwindling numbers barely holding off the overwhelming Mexica forces. The trail they left was a horrifying testament to the night's casualties, abandoned weapons, discarded armor, and the countless bodies of soldiers and horses. The weight of the gold they had so greedily carried now proved to be a curse, dragging many to their watery graves. The sounds of battle echoed across the valley, the clash of steel, the thud of arrows, the cries of pain, and the unceasing, triumphant war chants of the Mexica. This relentless pursuit was not just a military action, it was a psychological torment. The Spanish, already exhausted and demoralized by the escape from Tenochtitlan, were now subjected to a continuous, harrowing ordeal. The Mexica's determination to completely annihilate the invaders was absolute. They were not merely driving the Spanish away. They were trying to wipe them out, to ensure that such a betrayal could never happen again. This was the Lakeside Fury, a chapter written in the blood and despair of a routed army. The brutal flight from Tenochtitlan had begun as a planned escape, but quickly devolved into a desperate scramble for survival. As the beleaguered Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies staggered away from the Lake Texcoco causeways, the chaos of La Noche Triste followed them like a shadow. They were no longer an army in formation, but a rooted mass of exhausted, wounded men, clinging to life with every ragged breath. The journey inland was a relentless gauntlet. Every step was agonizing. The Mexica, driven by an unyielding desire for total annihilation, pursued them without mercy. The terrain itself became an enemy. Muddy paths, dense vegetation, and hidden streams slowed their progress. The heavy Spanish armor, once a symbol of their dominance, now weighed them down like an inescapable burden, especially for those who had sustained injuries. Many, too weak or too slow, were cut down, their final moments consumed by the relentless fury of their pursuers. Food and water became scarce, adding another layer of torment to their desperate march. The wounded suffered terribly, their cries of pain a constant, haunting backdrop to the sounds of battle. Soldiers once proud and confident now walked with glazed eyes, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. Cortés, though wounded himself, fought with a desperate valor, riding back and forth along the column, attempting to inspire courage in his shattered ranks. He was everywhere, rallying his captains, pushing the stragglers, and fighting alongside his men in desperate skirmishes. The Mexica attacks were not confined to large, organized battles. They utilized hit-and-run tactics, ambushing the Spanish from dense thickets, launching volleys of arrows, and then melting back into the landscape before the conquistadors could mount a full counterattack. This constant harassment chipped away at the Spanish morale and numbers, preventing them from resting or regrouping effectively. For every brief moment of reprieve, the chilling sound of distant war drums or the sudden appearance of a small band of warriors reminded them that their pursuers were always close behind. The route they took led them through hostile territory, where local tribes, emboldened by the news of the Spanish defeat, also joined the pursuit. They were running a gauntlet of enemies, a stark reversal of their earlier, seemingly unstoppable conquest. This wasn't merely a retreat. It was an unfolding catastrophe, a complete inversion of power where the hunters had become the hunted. The landscape they traversed became a grim testament to their suffering. Abandoned treasures, discarded weapons, and the ever-present bodies of their fallen comrades marked their desperate trail. Each mile gained was paid for with blood and tears. The once invincible conquistadors were reduced to a ragged band of survivors, stripped of their pride and their grand illusions. Their escape from Tenochtitlan had been a night of sorrows, but the days that followed were a testament to their desperate will to survive against overwhelming odds. The dream of easy conquest had vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a fight for every single life. As the sun finally rose on the morning after La Noche Triste, it illuminated a scene of utter devastation. The battered remnants of Cortés's forces, having escaped the immediate clutches of Tenochtitlan, found themselves in a valley of despair. Their numbers were decimated, their spirits crushed, and the grand illusion of an easy conquest irrevocably shattered. This was the Valley of Tears, a stark landscape reflecting the profound sorrow and staggering losses of the previous night. The toll was horrific. Hundreds of Spanish soldiers, perhaps even more, lay dead in the murky waters of Lake Texcoco or along the causeways and pathways leading from the city. Many of these brave, or perhaps foolhardy, men had drowned, weighed down by the very gold they had so desperately sought. Their Tlaxcalan allies, who had fought with unwavering loyalty alongside the conquistadors, suffered even greater casualties, their sacrifice often overlooked in historical accounts. The once formidable cavalry was now but a shadow, their horses either killed or lost in the chaotic retreat. Cannons, precious gunpowder, and much of their hard-won plunder had been abandoned, swallowed by the lake or seized by the victorious Mexica. For the Mexica people, however, this moment was one of profound, albeit temporary, triumph. They had not only driven the invaders from their sacred city, but they had inflicted a crushing defeat, a humiliating blow to the seemingly invincible Spanish. The war drums that had filled the night with dread now sounded with the triumphant beats of victory. The city, though scarred, had purged itself of the foreign presence, at least for now. Their warriors had fought with unparalleled courage and tactical brilliance, defending their homeland against an enemy that vastly outmatched them in technology. Yet even in this moment of victory, a shadow lingered. The cost had been immense, not just in lives, but in the psychological wounds inflicted by betrayal and desecration. Their beloved emperor Montezuma was dead. Their sacred sites had been defiled. And while they had won this battle, they knew, with a heavy heart, that the Spanish were not truly defeated. The seeds of vengeance had been sown, not only in their hearts, but also in the mind of the indomitable Cortés. For the survivors of the Spanish column, the journey continued, a grueling trek marked by exhaustion, hunger, and the constant threat of renewed attacks. Cortés, sitting under a tree at a place later known as Papatla, is said to have wept. Whether for his lost men, his shattered ambitions, or the sheer horror of the night, those tears symbolized the utter despair of that moment. It was a raw human reaction to a catastrophe that had nearly consumed everything he had built. La Noche Triste was more than a battle, it was a turning point. For the Spanish, it was a brutal awakening, a sobering lesson in the ferocity and resilience of the indigenous peoples they sought to conquer. For the Mexica, it was a moment of glorious, bloody vindication, a testament to their strength and their unyielding spirit. The trail of blood left across the causeways and into the Valley of Tears marked not an ending, but a pause, a moment of reflection before the next, inevitable chapter in the conquest. Even after such a hard-won victory, the Mexica knew their struggle was far from over. La Noche Triste was a triumph, but it was not the end of the war. As the Spanish limped away, leaving a trail of death and despair, Tenochtitlan breathed a collective sigh of relief, yet prepared for the inevitable storm to come. The city, though victorious, was wounded. Its sacred spaces had been desecrated, its emperor murdered, and its people had witnessed horrors they would never forget. Yet a powerful spirit of defiance quickly took root. The Mexica were not broken. Instead, their resolve was hardened, forged in the fires of betrayal and vengeance. They immediately began the arduous task of cleansing their city, rebuilding their temples, and preparing for the return of the Spanish. This was not merely a physical reconstruction. It was a spiritual and cultural renewal, a reaffirmation of their identity in the face of existential threat. Leadership swiftly transitioned. Cuitlahuac, Montezuma's brother, was chosen as the new Tlahtani, or emperor. He was a fierce warrior and a shrewd strategist, committed to driving the Spanish from their lands forever. Under his command, the Mexica marshaled their forces, strengthening their defenses, hunting their military tactics, and forging alliances with neighboring city-states that had also suffered under the Spanish presence. They understood that their survival depended on unity and preparedness. The immediate aftermath saw a surge in Mexica confidence. They had proved that the Spanish were not gods, that they could be defeated, and that their seemingly invincible weapons could be overcome by sheer numbers, tactical prowess, and an intimate knowledge of their own land. This period was a testament to their enduring spirit, their capacity for resilience, and their deep connection to their ancestral ways. They reinforced the causeways, anticipating another attack. They trained new warriors, teaching them how to fight against the armored Spanish and their horses. They adapted their strategies, learning from the painful lessons of the initial encounters. The air of Tenochtitlan, once filled with the tension of occupation, now vibrated with purposeful activity, a city preparing for the fight of its life. However, a silent, invisible enemy had also entered their city with the Spanish: smallpox. This devastating European disease, against which the indigenous populations had no immunity, began to sweep through Tenochtitlan like a plague. It decimated their population, including, tragically, the newly appointed Emperor Cuitlahuac, who succumbed to the illness just months after taking power. This unforeseen biological warfare would prove to be a more formidable foe than any steel sword or arquebus. Despite this new horrific challenge, the Mexica spirit remained unyielding. Cuauhtémoc, Cuitlahuac's nephew, bravely stepped forward to lead, proving to be an equally determined and courageous ruler. He rallied his people, inspiring them to fight on, even as their numbers dwindled and their bodies weakened. Their city had tasted victory, and they would defend it to their last breath. La Noche Triste had shown the world the fury of the Mexica, and in its aftermath, their resilience and unyielding spirit shone even brighter, a defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. The thunderous shouts of victory on La Noche Triste faded, but the echoes of that brutal night resonated for centuries, forever shaping the destiny of a continent. The Spanish had been humiliated, their pride shattered, and their ranks decimated. Hernán Cortés, despite his crushing defeat, was not broken. From the Valley of Tears, where he paused to mourn his losses, he began to meticulously plan his return. He forged new alliances with indigenous tribes who resented Aztec dominance, most notably the Tlaxcalans, and with grim determination, built new brigantines to lay siege to the great island city once more. For the Mexica, La Noche Triste was a glorious, yet fleeting triumph. They had pushed back the seemingly invincible invaders, proving their unparalleled bravery and strategic might. Their new emperor, the valiant Cuauhtémoc, rallied his people with an inspiring defiance, leading them through the unimaginable ravages of smallpox and the arduous preparation for a renewed Spanish assault. For 80 days, in one of the most brutal sieges in history, the Mexica defended Tenochtitlan with an almost superhuman resolve, fighting street by street, house by house, until their magnificent city was reduced to rubble. The fall of Tenochtitlan in the year 1521 marked the end of the Aztec Empire, but it was not the end of the Mexica people, nor the end of their spirit. La Noche Triste stands as a powerful testament to their initial victory, a moment when the tables turned, and the conquered almost wiped out their conquerors. It reminds us of the profound courage of a people defending their homeland, their culture, and their very existence against an overwhelming foreign power. It highlights the devastating impact of betrayal, the ferocity of a people pushed to their breaking point, and the tragic consequences of cultural collision. The legacy of that night is etched into the very fabric of Mexico. It is a story of immense loss, of cultures irrevocably altered, but also of incredible resilience and resistance. It serves as a stark reminder that history is never simple, and victory is often stained with immense human cost. The courage displayed by the Mexico warriors on that dark, chaotic night continues to inspire, a beacon of defiance against insurmountable odds. My friends, we've journeyed through the chaos and sorrow of La Noche Triste, witnessing a pivotal moment where courage and desperation clashed under a moonless sky. This story reminds us of the raw, unfiltered drama of human history, where civilizations rise and fall, and heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. If this deep dive into the legendary warriors and the dramatic turning points of history resonates with you, then this is just the beginning. We have countless more stories of courage, conflict, and transformation waiting to be explored. Don't miss out on our next adventure. Subscribe to our channel now to join our community and embark on more incredible journeys through time. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspect of La Noche Triste surprised you the most? Your insights fuel our quest for knowledge. And if you found this video compelling, consider sharing it with a friend who appreciates the epic tales of history. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, keep exploring the legends that shape our world.